Welcome to Melt. I'm Suresh Venkat. Here's wishing you a very happy new year. On Melt today, it's time to take stock of the year gone by, track key trends, and try and build a playbook for what the new year may bring. Helping us do just that is Santosh Desai, the Managing Director and CEO of Futurebrands India. Santosh, of course, is well known for being able to sift through all that marketing faff and come up with profound insights about consumer behavior. So, what's in store for the Indian consumer? Will purpose and sustainability still dominate marketing chatter? And is brand Bollywood in serious trouble? Let's find out as we get ready to melt with Santosh Desai. Santosh, let's start with a broad overview. And I know this is a difficult question to answer, but how do you evaluate the year gone by for the Indian consumer, both urban and rural?
Well, I think it's been an interesting year in that obviously we are still in a recovery mode. I mean, after 2020 and even the early days of 2021, I think finally we see the economy kind of kicking back in and the consumer sort of recovering and that the desire to consume and a lot of it. So it's interesting. It's also quite patchy. There are sectors in which we've seen what has been called revenge consumption take place with a vengeance, because there's this eagerness. Travel, for instance, this enormous eagerness to resume life and go back and do everything that you were deprived of doing. And on the other hand, there is still an overhang in terms of the ability to do everything that you want to, and you therefore find there are other sectors where there is still slow recovery. So I think overall the recovery has been a little slower than anticipated in this year, and so to that extent it has been a bit of a dampener. But overall, I think there is some things have changed permanently as a result of the pandemic. Some things we've gone back exactly to what we were doing earlier, and other places we are negotiating. So I think you see the full spectrum of shifts that have taken place.
So in terms of consumer behavior, what has changed permanently in your view?
Well, I think some things that have changed permanently. One, it's not necessarily consumer behavior, but certainly in terms of the way we lead our lives is work and practices related to work. Mm-hmm. I think the idea of being in office all the time, going for meetings all the time, commuting all the time, I think has become it's just difficult now to go back to, because it just seems quite pointless. So I think there's that. There is a certain sort of certainly a new mindset that we see with respect to work. In terms of consumption, I think areas like at one level, like I said, in things like travel and eating out, we see this great desire to kind of maximize whatever it is that the moment gives you. So there is a very great sense of living in the present, I think, that you see, which is a departure from the past. And the other area where you see a change, I think, is health. Although I think we are mostly everybody is sick and tired of the preventive measures that the pandemic forced on us. But I think there is a much greater significant kind of an awareness of health.
And how has the year been for Indian brands? Do you have broad thoughts?
Again, I think it's a mixed year, somewhat mixed year, because I think, like I said, there are some categories in which brands have done well. They have, they've reaped the advantage of the fact that the consumer is sick and tired of holding back and restraining herself. But in other areas, I think you find brands haven't done, have struggled. I think the interesting thing over the last couple of years has been the emergence of the D2C brands. Mm-hmm. I think that is a big shift that has taken place, and that has had its own kind of an arc. I mean, you had a huge amount of excitement around it, and the pandemic gave a huge boost to a lot of these brands. But now with the funding ecosystem becoming a little saner, I think there is a added pressure on these brands. So I think that whole journey, I think we've seen being traversed this year, from very early excitement to a much greater sense of realism that has crept in. So I think that certainly has been, because it's a completely new, vibrant space, I think that has perhaps been the most interesting part of the brandscape this year.
Am I to infer from that the D2C brands were partly a function of excess funding, excess liquidity, and that's why they became sort of the business model du jour in the last couple of years?
I think that's true in general. I think you can say that for most startups. I think they are balance sheet led kind of ventures, and there is a certain amount of the discount on the future that they place is extremely low. So I mean, there is, I think, that element.
So what's the next couple of years going to look like for these D2C brands? Are they going to be stressed? Are they going to recover? Are they going to pivot?
Yeah. So I think it's the one thing that I think I would need to say before answering that question is that I think there's a fundamental reason why D2C brands have come to stay, and those reasons are not going away.
Okay.
And the first, I think, and the most fundamental one is a consumer shift that has happened. What technology has done over the last few years is create a much greater sense of oneself as an individual. You are an individual. Your relationship with the world is a personal relationship. That's what a smartphone does. You are the person calling the shots. You are deciding what part of the world to interact with. You are presenting yourself to the world all the time. So there is a fundamental, and as a result of that, you have to ask yourself, what do I, earlier it used to be a deep philosophical question. Now it's an everyday, very practical question as to who am I? What face of myself do I present to the world? So, when you take a selfie, it's like the rapid prototyping of the self. You're looking for a version of yourself to present to the world, right? So I think that this movement towards individualism in an experiential sense, in an everyday sense, means that you have lots of spaces to fill up. And these are little pixels of identity that you're filling up. And you want to fill it up with something specific. Generic, big, conventional brands do not give you that sense of a personal self-definition. And so therefore, that is one big reason why we are seeing D2C brands emerge. The other is the fragmentation of media and the fact that, today it is possible for brands to get created in newer ways which were not possible earlier. So you don't need to be a mega brand with mega budgets to build brands. These essential factors are not going away anywhere, right? So I do see a lull in terms of, because of the funding kind of ecosystem responding in a certain way. I do see a lull in the next couple of years. I do see greater pressures on the D2C brands. Also, there have been an indiscriminate number of brands. Everybody, because it's so easy, there are low, entry barriers. You've just had everybody, sort of decide to create brands. So I do think there will be some kind of weeding out that will happen. But as a space, I find it impossible to believe that, I see there are strong underlying reasons why this trend will continue.
One of the big marketing themes for this year, at least evident from advertising and communications, is purpose-led brand building. Almost every brand worth its salt is attaching itself to some sort of purpose or the other. Quite often it sounds the same, and sometimes it can go horribly wrong. Right? What are your thoughts on the future of this so-called purpose-led marketing?
I find this whole idea of purpose a bit of a misnomer because, in a sense, all brands have always had purpose. I think what is happening now, what we are calling purpose, is something lofty and something altruistic and something which, borders on saving the world, right? It is that has become the norm. I find a fundamental hypocrisy there. There's a fundamental hypocrisy, and so it's just a new kind of a marketing lie. Mm-hmm. Because unless the organization has been founded on those principles, unless the way it is evaluated financially is on those principles, unless you have a different way of evaluating organizations and evaluating business.
The so-called triple bottom
line.
Triple
bottom line. You have the old, you're wired in an old way. And then you adopt something called purpose. And I find the argument which actually some people who have pioneered this kind of a movement have made about the fact that actually purpose-led brands do better. And therefore, you must have purpose. To me, that is the most self-defeating argument ever.
And those are motivated studies. It looks like that you want to prove that conclusion.
No, even if you do. But the fact is that means that if tomorrow they stop delivering those results, you will stop your purpose. So then there is no honesty behind that purpose. If it is only a business contrivance, then it is no different from using celebrities or using any other marketing sort of a technique. So I am skeptical. There are organizations that are founded on the idea of purpose, and I think more power to them. But they are a fraction. There are few, and also I think over a period of time, I think what we have found is, what this has done is made marketing horribly, horribly boring. Everybody is saintly and
Correct. What happened to good old fun advertising?
Exactly.
Eat a chocolate or fly an airline.
It's perfectly okay for a brand to have a purpose to say that make people laugh, and connect with their silly sides. Why is that not purpose?
Yeah.
Why should it always be to save the girl child in Somalia? I don't understand why purpose should be limited to something lofty alone.
The other big word you hear in brand marketing these days is sustainability. Quite often people forget the first leg of sustainability, which is long-term financial viability, and skip to the second and third, which is saving people and saving planet. Does the Indian consumer really care about this kind of sustainability?
No, I think there is certainly a cohort of customer, which, you will have young customers who do care, but that's a very small. So in an absolute, in terms of size, that's not significant. In terms of influence, it is. So I would not say that there is no consumer at all that cares about issues like sustainability. But in an overall scheme of things, I mean, if you were to look at and pull back and look at it in the overall construct of the Indian market, then that would be minuscule. I think this is a supply side kind of, it's a brand led kind of a movement. I think it's important. I think sustainability, when it embraces all dimensions of business practice, I think then it becomes meaningful. So it is not merely a marketing sort of a tool.
Buzzword. Or
yeah, but I'm not trying to make the case here that business should not be mindful of societal concerns. But I'm merely making the case that most often it is hypocritical. It is lip service. It is something that, you know, doing and saying what people want to hear. If it is indeed steeped in actual practice, then it is absolutely worth doing. But in a lot of cases, it isn't.
Another trend, Santosh, we've seen this year is a lot of women protagonists in advertising and in film. Now, have these films and ads captured the current zeitgeist? And does this mean the end of the hypermasculine man?
So the answer, in a certain sense, is that, you know, both parts of the question. Paradoxically, it is yes. I think it has captured the current zeitgeist, and no, it is not the end of the hypermasculine man.
It's just a phase we're going through.
No, what I mean by that is that yes, of course, I think you see, and you know, whatever work we have done across the country, we do find that the biggest change is that we see is you know, in the way women see themselves, in the way they see the world, in the way they present themselves. By far, and it is across, you know, all town classes. I mean, that's the most starkly noticeable sort of shift that you see when you travel across India. So I think, and when advertising or cinema reflects something like that, I think it does capture the current zeitgeist. Part of it may be a certain amount of posturing by brands, but it is rooted in something real and something that is powerful. But in a sense, if you were to look at not advertising, but if you were to look at cinema, you would find that the hyper-masculine man is alive and well.
True, especially in the recent.
Yeah, if you look at all the big hits, you know, of a recent time, they're all hyper-masculine.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, somebody who touches something and, you know, things
Masculine,
start flying. You know, as a result.
Misogynistic. They tick
all of it, all the boxes, all the boxes, right? Actually, the two are related in my view. The more women come to the fore, and the more, because I think in many ways, Indian society has been founded, what it considers to be its values and the bedrock of its values is rooted in the idea of controlling women and limiting them to an assigned place. And when that fundamental kind of construct gets dismantled or gets threatened, there is fear.
This is the backfire effect in some sense of the term. Let's talk about film. What explains the sudden rise of Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and especially at the cost of Bollywood? Everybody's wondering if Bollywood has lost its mojo and regional cinema has suddenly found its mojo.
I think one of the powerful things about cinema in India and Bollywood, certainly in an older time, was that Bollywood spoke to deep sort of psychological needs that you could not articulate. Right. So if you look at the 70s angry young man kind of genre, you would find that a lot of them are rooted in the notion of a disappointment with father figures, with authority figures. You know, we make fun of Bollywood in that era certainly as being unrealistic, but in many ways they spoke a truth that went beyond outward realism. I think storytelling of a kind which is founded on those fundamental truths. So in a sense, the hypermasculine films of the South are speaking to this male need, because the sense of threat that the man feels is kind of compensated by these exaggerated, almost caricaturized kind of depictions that we see.
But there is an underlying
truth,
which is caricaturized.
Yeah, so the caricature does not capture the fact that it's what has happened is that in fact cinema has taken itself too seriously Bollywood has, because it is speaking to multiplex audiences. It has the ability to speak to smaller audiences. Its themes have become smaller. They speak to a smaller sort of mindset, and they're smaller kind of, you know, they're smaller ideas.
Okay. This may be because I'm in my 50s, but words like content creation and influencer, my hackles get raised immediately, and it really says, who are you? What is this content creation? A set of random videos does not content make. Do you think the creator economy or the so-called creator economy is here to stay?
Yes, I think so. I mean, and if that is bad news for you, then apologies. But I think it's certainly here to stay. And also, look, what has happened is that there is a fundamental shift in our assumptions in the world, right? I grew up and you grew up in a time when it was very clear that only a few of us had the microphones, and you, in a very literal sense. Never in the history of humanity has it been possible for every individual to have a broadcast platform. Never, right? This is the first time
Ever happened.
ever that we have this ability, and that is going to change things. If everybody has a voice, everybody has the power to create. I, for instance, have been a huge fan, of TikTok. And unfortunately not here anymore, because I've just the kind of raw energy that you see here, the creativity that you see here, in very constrained circumstances, people are sort of,
And it's a lot of fun to watch.
it's enormous fun to watch,
yeah.
right? There's enormous fun to watch. And I think that kind of a raw unleashing of creativity, along with it, the nastiest opinions, the vilest abuses, all of that has been, once you unlock something like this, you can't control, what it is that you unlock. But I certainly do think that the idea of the fact that there will be a few people who will speak and the rest of us would listen, that is permanently gone. And therefore, you give it whatever name you want. Content is a ghastly word. So it may not be the great word, but what that stuff, that whatever that material is, that is not going away anywhere. And I think it's certainly here to stay.
Now let's talk about the rise of the influencer, which also is back to back with the idea of the content or the creator economy or the content economy. With the rise of the influencer, has the power of the celebrity, the movie star or the sports star waned a little bit?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure it has waned today, but I think if I was to look at the long-term trend, I think certainly what has happened is that, if you were to think about that whole space as a pie, then obviously the share of the pie that the celebrity was getting has been cut down. But it's not a zero-sum game, because I think what is happening is that
the pie itself
has expanded. More interesting thing is the fact that there is a diminishing of the power at a certain level, because in a way, what influencers do, and is the fact that they speak to you on your own terms. As a consumer, if an influencer is telling you something, that is a person very much like you. I think one of the problems that brands have had, particularly when it comes to expanding categories, is that they've tended to speak from a very elevated platform, and they have spoken down. So particularly beauty or fashion.
So-called educating the customers.
Always.
Sounds patronizing to start with.
It is patronizing. The idea, and so many brands will say, we have to educate the customer on this.
Insane. The customer has the money. Why would you want to educate him or her?
Absolutely, right. Whereas in the influencer, you find a fundamental difference. It's a peer-to-peer communication. There is an understanding of context. There isn't a quest for perfection. It is not a runway idea of beauty, for instance. It is what you can manage. And I think that a peer-to-peer kind of an understanding, and I think is way more powerful.
Okay, let's move on from influencers to the metaverse. Now, you can't have a conversation with any marketer for more than 10 minutes without hearing the word Web3 or metaverse. What are your clients, if anything, if they're asking for you from this area?
No, they currently aren't. The fact is everybody is kind of reading the same things and getting, it's conversation currently rather than strategy. But the fact of the matter is that till such time as there is a access mechanism, right? Till such time as, the idea of the metaverse is something that I think as an idea is compelling, but it is nowhere near any form of reality.
One of the things that is reality, though, especially in the last few days, is this chatbot called ChatGPT and this online illustrator called DALL-E. Right? And ChatGPT can generate alarmingly human-like responses. What does this portend for society?
I think that is profoundly. I find that whole area profoundly significant, because I think when we are able to, because the feeling always was that it will be the repetitive tasks that will get taken over by AI, and at least we are creative, and nobody can take that away from us. And here we are. That seems to be disappearing. I think it's profoundly important, because I think in a way it redefines and the notion of creativity. I think we set a very low bar for what we call creative. And I think what this tells us is that if creativity is a form of regurgitation, you cannot beat AI, because AI cannot create. So AI cannot, for instance, today at least, it cannot read, which is what great art does, which is that it reads from the context, what we talked about cinema, for instance, and responds to the context in a new and interesting way. AI fundamentally, what it is currently doing is looking at patterns that we have been using in the past and in a sense reproducing those patterns.
And combining them in extraordinarily clever ways.
Exactly. And distilling them and sort of, right. It is always plausibility. And the key feature of AI is that it is plausible. It is serviceable. It works. But that's more than enough, because what we call creative in most cases is just that, is regurgitation, it is serviceability, and it is not actual original creation. So I think in a certain sense, it is going to eat into lots of things, particularly in our space. If we talk about advertising, marketing, it is going to, at one level, make things very easy, but it is also going to put enormous amount of pressure on creators, because they can, at a certain level of mediocrity today has been taken over by the computer.
So it's not the repetitive factory robot kind of tasks. It can also be tasks like copywriting and illustration.
Copywriting, illustration, photography tomorrow.
And we take it
and who knows, filmmaking, very soon.
We use a lot of terms like Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Millennials, and now apparently Gen Alpha for the next generation. Are these terms relevant to India, or do we need Indian terms for these?
So in general, I think these terms, historically they have been completely irrelevant. Because you have baby boomers, which are like a post-World War II sort of what has it got to do with anything with India, right? Nothing to do with India, right? And so you had a whole bunch of such sort of labels. Where I do think that there is a greater convergence is when those labels are based on something that actually is unifying the world today, is technology. Even then, I think I would always make a case for locally sort of generated labels. They may incorporate elements of. So for instance, if I was to look back in India, the things that have had the most profound effect in the last 30, 40 years is liberalization and the coming of the mobile phone first, the coming of the smartphone thereafter. So I do think that in general, philosophically, I think it certainly makes sense to generate your own labels. That being said, I think these labels are not as ridiculous as they used to be once upon a time.
All right. Final question. The most memorable media campaign of 2022? Anything
None.
That comes to mind?
Actually, the word memorable to my mind today does not apply to advertising.
Okay.
Because I don't think that, in fact...
That's a scathing indictment of advertising.
It is.
So
you
don't remember a single campaign?
I had to... So since I knew that a question like this was going to be asked today, so I actually had to actively kind of not only hunt my own kind of, I had to
Memory,
sort of...
but
I had to ask other people and look at, sort of doing a search. And I managed to come up with a couple of names, but truly that was the process. So Manyavar, I felt, did a good job of that whole, the idea of not dressing down and dressing up.
Oddly enough, a brand like Manyavar
did that, which I thought was nice. I think also, I think Tanish did, I think the whole couples, their conversations before marriage, I thought that was interesting. But truly, if you were to ask me maybe a month from now, a couple of months from now, I think this would have slipped my mind.
All right. On that note, Santosh Desai, thank you very much for talking to us on Melt.
My pleasure.
That's a wrap on this episode. You can follow Melt on social media. The handle is Ready to Melt, or simply log on to readytomelt.com if you'd like to follow me. I'm @Suvenk on Twitter. Thanks for watching, and once again, wish you a superb year ahead.